and welcome to your Daily Game Face. I am Dr. Kim Lannon, coming to you for your 5th year in a row.
Is this our anniversary?
Well, we just passed it.
Oh, we just passed it.
And I didn't really talk about it because I've been on a roll of doing those 3 in a series, and then the last week, and then this one.
The year of you.
The year of me,
yeah,
which is the year of you. So you're having your year of you. So making sure you're keeping track of where you are in the year of you as we talk about very important topics. And I eat my icebreakers because I don't know. I had coffee this morning and it was like, okay, well, there we go.
I went macchiato this morning and I'm already regretting it.
Why did it make you feel great?
No. That's not nice.
What? I said, did it make you feel great?
Just the caffeine a little bit bit too much in the morning.
Oh, well, yeah, because you had a macchiato.
Yep.
So I'm sitting in the pneumonia hatch of the studio. Okay. I love that. It's beautiful.
I'll come in and turn it up.
Oh, thank you. I would like to have it up beyond 50 because I'm freezing. Thank you. I appreciate that. So good when Lou takes care of me. By the time the show's over, I'll be warm.
That's my job. What?
Right at the end. And I said, by the time the show's over, I'll be warm and it will be perfect for the next person.
For Ron.
Oh, yeah, because Ron needs heat. Anyway, so good morning. Oh, I'm frozen online. I was. No, okay. I'm unfrozen now. So how was your weekend?
Oh, it was fine.
Okay. There's excitement. Well, we'll move right into it. So, last week's show, like the 3 in front of it, and then that was like a series of like, narcissism and toxicity and like whatever. And then last week's show, I started talking about, how to untangle yourself, which I didn't get to that part, but how to untangle yourself from the toxicity of like emotionally immature people. But I set it up about talking about how people become emotionally fractured and how that happens. And I've done this in a variety of ways over the years, but I'm going to keep doing it in different ways because it's a perpetual and chronic problem in people. And I have so many other things that come up because people listen and then they ask me questions and then I get all these ideas and I jot them down in my notebook. And so, I try to integrate them all in. And if Ryan is listening today, he did ask a question at the last show. And I, of course, we had it up 2 minutes ago and now it's gone. So I have no idea what it was.
That was last week's file.
It was last week's file. So if Ryan's on
and
he wants to ask that question again for me to answer, I'm happy to do that. But let's do a recap because I'm going to jump right in again because I want to get to it and also be able to answer questions and talk a lot about this as we go forward. And then we'll close out this section of the show and then start a new one next week, I think, if I get through all of this. So, in talking with colleagues and
I've got the question if you want the question.
Hold that for a second.
Sorry.
So talking with colleagues about emotionally immature or emotionally fractured people, I like to call it fractured because the fracture creates immaturity in a person. There's so many facets to it because does that mean that a person is like completely that way as a whole? No, it can mean that, basically a person can from basically the age of 11 to 24 be completely immature in their ability to function in varieties of different areas, but then they can also be brilliant or really successful in other areas, right? But in terms of like relationally, this is where we see in our work that this is a problem. And this is where all those things I was talking about last week kind of come out. It's usually in relationships that are intimate, like friendships and close, intimate, partnerships, and then also in workplaces. I'm focusing more on the relationship issue as a whole. And so I'm going to keep it to that. And so as a recap, before we get to Ryan's question from last week, just in case people needed the recap, the characteristics that I went through of the emotionally fractured person, I was saying that, very egocentric, right? So having that self-preoccupied feeling of what's in it for them, right? Kind of stance, not much of any appreciation that other people are real inside. It's really about what they are and they're feeling versus another's. poor empathy
Mhm.
or lack of empathy completely, can't feel what others feel, can't step into other people's shoes and imagine how they feel, will tell you that they can, but then when you ask them to do it, you can tell that they can't do it.
Right.
Or they don't have the ability to mentalize what other people feel, like they can't even, it's usually I don't know, or it's a guessing game. I think I talked about, like, it's more like, how do I feel? Dismissed? Like it's always like a question because
Yeah.
they're guessing at it. Very poor self-reflection, probably in relation to not asking themselves if they caused a problem, right? Because they externalize. It's like, did I hurt you? Well, I can't look at that if I hurt you. It's always that if I hurt you, then I'm sorry. It's not I'm sorry I hurt you,
Yeah.
those kinds of things,
Right.
because then the self-reflection piece would be there, and that's just not there. So it's an externalized and projection on what goes on in their lives, which makes it hard for them to change because they don't ask the right questions of themselves perceptively. They don't ask the right questions about, and have curiosity about the effects that they have on other people, which makes them not change, right? Then they're afraid of emotional intimacy because they've been detached, because it comes down to an attachment issue that starts between 0 and 6 years old. And so they're afraid of emotional attachment. So they either avoid it or become very ambivalent to it. Because they've either had to become self-sufficient, they've had to take care of themselves a lot, they don't trust in the world. And when you try to get close to them and get into any kind of depth, they are more brush you off kind of people. They're very dismissive. Everything's kind of a joke. They don't go to the depth spaces with you. So it becomes very unfulfilling if you're in relationship with these people. It's sort of tragic, and can be very lonely and empty. And then their interpretation of reality or how it feels is how they kind of function. So if it feels like something is against them, um, they will immediately go into defense mode and attack mode and Darvo mode, deny that it's there, attack you, reverse it on you, which is a gaslight, reverse it on you, and then become the victim. And then all of a sudden you become the perpetrator. And then you just don't know, like, all of a sudden, how did that just happen? And that's what creates the self-doubt in the partner or the other person or the work buddy or whatever. And
that's
if
red flag number one.
There's
turning it right around.
Turn it right around on you. And but you have to, it's red flag if you see it, because a lot of people, and I talked about that last week, a lot of people don't see it right away, or if at all, because they're so used to having that happen to them in general themselves, or they give a lot of grace and space that
maybe I did do something,
or it will change or whatever. There's a lot of latitude to that. And so if this person who's emotionally fractured feels criticized or attacked in their mind in any way, it's not what's been said or the content. They usually just have a very distorted way of looking at things, and they use feelings as a way to figure out how to be in the world. And their feelings are very primitive and childlike, because the way that a person that's emotionally fractured when they become an adult comes from the childhood reactions. It doesn't come from adult, mature, fleshed out self-perspective, self-observing, all those places. It comes from immediate, this is the same experience I had as a child. So their reality is not matching the reality of adult. It's a reality that's matching as a child. So they're very immature in that way, which so all those characteristics lead to the immaturity that the person has, because they can't effectively do life on life's terms, because what they're doing is they're basing it on life on how they feel. And so that's why a lot of people get into conflict or battles over, but that's a feeling. Not just because you have a feeling doesn't make the situation accurate, and you can't win with that, because then that becomes the right fight. And I talk about the right fight all the time, and people who are in the right fight will scream louder, be more demonstrative, be more personalized, attack you harder, say mean things, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to not be objective. They're trying to base the reality off of their egocentrism, because that is the focus of their distortion that keeps them in their balance.
The argument gets moved to you,
right,
as opposed to whatever the discussion was about.
Right. So they move their reality and adjust it so it's not upsetting to them. but it becomes upsetting to you. So they'll deny things, they dismiss things, distort, they'll act like things never happen. I never said that, and turn it and accuse you. And if they don't want to deal with something, they just leave you hanging with their damage. They'll just, you're like the collateral, like spider web that, I'm like, I don't want to talk about this right now. And I was just joking, or, can't you lighten up? I'm just trying to have levity. Like, it's always these things that make you feel less than. So, and there's a lot of rigidity in that person who has all of those. So, and awareness. So in this recap, awareness is what's missing of self-reflection of how they're affecting other people. So we're talking about that. How do you spot an emotionally fractured person? I said last week, it's hard to spot them, right? Especially if you haven't had experience with them, or you have that naivete that is like, how could people possibly be like that if you're not like that? Narcissistic personality disordered people are emotionally immature when it's full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. And we have to remind, listeners that everyone falls on the continuum of having little pieces of narcissism. But when you're in the full blownness of having all those characteristics and you're fully narcissistically invested because it protects you, you're going to see more of this emotional immaturity and so many more fractures in a person, because they're fracturing you. Inevitably, if you're starting to feel fractured being with a person, it's because they're fracturing you. Their fractures
takes time because they're really good at putting on the show.
Right, exactly.
You have to be able to peek behind the curtain a bit.
Mm-hmm. And that's what brings you into you're drawn into the emotionally EFP. You're drawn into their fractures when you're dating someone, right? Because they tell you what they know you want to hear. They tell you the right thing. They've groomed themselves to groom you. They train you how to treat them right at the beginning, because that's
how they picked you because you're groomable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And and I think I made the connection that a couple of my supervisors had said, like eye roll thing, like if you have an eye roll, you're in front of a narcissist and run. Also, you can tell when you're sitting in front of like a full blown emotionally fractured person who's also like a narcissistic personality disorder, because there's sort of psychopathologies there, because you would lend them money because they convince you like, I need money, when in fact they don't, but they'll come to you for it in lieu of having $1 million in their pocket. They'll still ask you for it.
But if you have empathy, a lot of times you give them leash.
Well, that's the thing but that's the prey. They prey on people that have the empathy, because they lack it, because that's what they look for. They look for the nurture that they didn't have.
Everything will be fine once we get past this.
Right, exactly.
They're just stressed.
Right, exactly. But the problem is it continues.
Yeah.
So what you're responding to is the charm, the attention, the social facility over time that they present, because they make it feel really good in social situations. And what ends up happening is it starts to unravel over time. Once the love bombing, once all that wonderful charm and love and things, that could be a honeymoon period of 6 months. It could be 2 years. It could be, a lot of times people say it was great until we got married. How long was that? 6 years before we got married. We got married and 2 days later it went to hell, right? It's that piece, right? So, depending on at the beginning, they don't do well when they don't get what they want, and it will be directed back at you when the honeymoon period is over, and they don't come to you and get they don't come to you to resolve things out. They come to you to get you to comply with them and their needs, because they're more invested in having a fight and to keep the chaos going, because that keeps their balance, because that's what they're used to. And so when we marry someone like that, and they don't have the basics because they're so emotionally fractured to work it out, the road for marriages is super hard, or the road for really long-term relationships with people like that is super hard. Much easier if you know sooner, but there's the caveat is it's hard to know sooner. And so what do you have to look for? You have to look for what's lacking right away. You have to say, are these hallmark characteristics that I just listed really quickly at the beginning as the recap, are they there? Because if they are, you're going to have a hard partnership, if you have a gut feeling intuitively, it's spelling trouble for you across the board. I was talking to a client after this last week, and they were talking about how they were listening and saying, like, when he refuses to talk to me, and says things like, I don't know, I don't need to talk about this, it's your issue, I don't, and the denial about like whether they've snarked at you, whether they've gaslit you, whether it's always, no, I don't need to talk about it, and they walk away from you. I always say any healthy individual will not just walk away from you. Any normal, I hate using the word normal, but within that bell curve of the normal range, any normal person will react in a responsive manner and not walk away. They will say things that are emotionally empathic. They will come in and meet you where you are to be there. An emotionally fractured person won't do that. And so what we end up doing is, because we want them so badly to love us and accept us and do all those things, and here's where we're getting into the new stuff today, is that we will emotionally end up taking care of them.
Yeah.
And it becomes exhausting because we're trying so hard to chalk it up to all the excuses of, and give them passes for their behavior.
Yeah.
And what it is they've done this lifelong. They've lifelong found people along the way to groom and to shape and cull and to fit to comply with what they need. And eventually people usually savvy up and they either get out or they get stuck, and you have to adapt to that. And so
there's a good chance, though, you fit that personality level perfectly. You like being in a white knight because you're gaining self-esteem from helping people out, so you find people you can help.
Are you talking about me personally?
No.
Oh, I was like, what?
The editorial you.
Oh, yes. So yes, and I think that that's the preying on. I'm opening up my little icebreakers. I think that yes, because it's a.
Chances are you're with them because you're kind of attracted to helping out, because that's where you gain your self-esteem.
Well, right, and so when you're a helper, or you're a nurturer in general, or a people pleaser with all those things, you will feel like you're a failure if it continues to keep wrapping that you just can't reach this person, you just can't get them to change. And in the year of me and the year of you, I've been trying to get people to see is your goal is not to get another person to change. Your goal is to take care of you. And I often get the kickback of, but that's so selfish. Nope. There's a very big difference between being selfish and egocentric, which is who we're talking about, versus being self-caring, self-protective, agency driven. Very big difference about how to set your boundaries for yourself. Unfortunately, I have two clients right now that are, and one in particular, it's very steadfast. No matter how much we get it in the office to understand that, okay, we've got it. It's about changing your own self to adapt yourself to make sure you take care of you. I will inevitably get feedback that's, okay, now I've done this and he's still not changing. And I'm like, yeah, because you're still invested in the expectation that he's going to meet the expectation you have for him, when that's not what it is. And you have to release. I don't say let go. You have to release yourself from that concept that's been either culturally driven or societally driven, and or both, familial driven, that you're supposed to be this person and therefore everyone else is supposed to be this person like you think they're supposed to be. That is not realistic.
You don't self-care to change somebody else. It's
right.
not the reason you self-care.
Right. But that's not what people think. So, right.
Self-care is about you.
Right. So in self-care, it's like, okay, so how do you untangle yourself from these messes, right? And oftentimes people say untangling means detaching, but that's not always what it is. No. Untangling means being able to set yourself apart so you're not in the toxicity, especially in places where you can't get out of the relationship for a variety of reasons. And untangling yourself is very hard. The deeper in, the longer time, and the more hold that the NPD or the the EFP has on you, the harder it is, because you've bought in. If you haven't done your own self-care, you'll buy in harder. So the harder it will be for you to back yourself out of it. And to emotionally stabilize an EFP, they do that thing where if they fear you will leave them, if they fear they're going to be abandoned, because remember their whole life is wrapped up in detached, of feeling not attached and not loved, they will rally and give you by proxy a look of their system, of their fractures being okay. They'll fix it.
Put the show back on.
They'll put the show back on and say, I've gone to therapy for the past couple weeks and I'm much better. It's going to be fine. Okay, that's not how this works, because therapy doesn't work in 2 or 3 weeks. Therapy doesn't work after you see one person for 3 weeks or 4 weeks in a row for 45 minutes to an hour, especially if you've never done it before and you just did the first 2, maybe 3, or intake and history. You aren't getting any better yet. That's not, you haven't even started doing the work. That's impossible. But people who are unfamiliar with a therapy or self-help process and knowing how insidious this fracture is, are like, oh, but they're getting better. They're going to be better. They're going to love me. They're going to give me what I want, all those things. So you go into that hopeaholic mode of believing what you're being told. It's like Stockholm syndrome, sympathizing with your abuser. You feel bad for them when they don't feel bad for you. They don't care how they've impacted you. They just want to make sure that they can double or triple down to keep you where you are, to isolate you away from everybody else is saying, this is bad, this is not healthy, this is really unwell. And so in doing that, the person who's in the relationship, even in workplaces, will go right back into being the emotional caretaker of this person and the self-esteem booster, because the other person, right? Say you're the fractured person and I'm the other. You're going to now make me feel like everything's good. And so what happens is I become your like jacked in again for supply to get from me. And you're going to just suck it dry until we have the next round of blow up. And for some people, it's 4-day cycle. Some days it's 10-day cycle. Some days it's month to month. So it's really dependent on the relationship. And every time that energy drain happens, it's alerting you to the anxious state of the fractured person. And you have to be savvy to know that if your energy is feeling depleted, you know that their anxious inner state is starting to impede on your life. And they don't soothe themselves. They look for you to soothe them. And if you don't, you've got a problem. It's your fault. It's your issue. It's because they're projecting out like what their parents didn't give. It's my parents' fault. They're saying that to you without, you have to translate that in your head to, they're not talking about me. They're talking about what they didn't get as a child. It's not you. It's, you didn't give me soothing. Who didn't give you soothing? You're 35. You're 25. Who didn't give you soothing? Like, I've known you for 2 years, or I've known you for a year. Right. So it's, they don't soothe themselves. And they
can't self-regulate.
I was just gonna say, they turn to you to regulate them and run their emotions in the way that they need, because they have trouble doing it, because they had trouble doing it as a little kid, and which is normal, because little kids are supposed to be dysregulated. Right. Little kids are supposed to have loving, nurturing guardrails around them to give them that uplift, to give them that
to teach them how to regulate,
and not let them run amok. I mean, I have very personal stories where I know little kids that are now grown adults, that when anything fracturing happened to them, they had 2 particular caregivers that were very much about, now don't do that, and like the right things to say, but then there was no consequence around it. So what they did was just be like, okay, so we've had enough conversation. I'm literally being like Pollyanna like this, because this is how they sound. Okay, and so it's okay. So you go back, and then the kid's like, I got over on it. Yep. And so what it does is build them up to being more maneuvering, more the coping strategy to get by you, to fracture you with their fractures. They're going to damage you. Hurt people hurt people. Miserable people love miserable company. So they will become more of those things and drag you into it if you allow it and if you don't see it, which is why I say to my clients, ask yourself not why is he doing this to me? Ask yourself, why are you allowing it to happen to you? If you ask yourself, why are you allowing, you're going to get further down your road. But if you stay with, why is he doing this to me? You're playing victim to their victimizing, and you just never get past it because they're going to energy drain you. And you can't untangle from that because you're in the loop of the sickness with them.
That's job number one, isn't it, of parenting? And this is the core thing, is that detachment of action and consequence, right? So you become the person who needs to shield them from consequence.
Right. Because you're
the parents constantly shielded them from consequence.
Right. And so then now
you don't let the kid drive his bus into a bridge.
Right.
But you pick the choices, you pick the places where they suffer a consequence for.
Right, because they're never given the opportunity to learn how to be an adult in an appropriate step by step. They're not getting taught how to do that because they're falling short of that consequence that runs them into because the safety net's always there. And if you always have a safety net, and I talk about this with people that have addiction issues and are trying, then one of their biggest problems, there's many, but one of the biggest problems I see with addiction is family members who continually jump in with safety nets.
Yep.
Because they're so afraid, because the addict at the time, the person with addiction, has trained them how to treat them, that the mother, the brother, the sister, the aunt, the uncle, the grandparent, the spouse, whatever, they're all trained early that it's their responsibility to regulate them, to soothe them, and to give to them. And if
Shield
they don't,
them from consequence.
And if they don't, there's a price to pay. It's emotional, it's physical, sometimes it's sexual, it's restrictions, it's all these things, financial, right? People will steal from you. People will take away things from you that are your God-given right with them in relationship to you, but they'll take it because they feel that you're doing something to them. And you don't even know.
Because they read your inability to shield them from consequence as a deficiency on your part.
Right.
And they get angry at you.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, like a child who internalizes from a good, loving parent, they feel loved and self-esteem. A child who internalizes from a non-nurturing, conditional, loving parent, they feel unloved and lack of self-esteem. So they go looking for places where it's going to come from, right? And so that's why you get looking for love in all the wrong places. I
call it the I'm okay, you're okay relationship.
Right. And it's a lie.
Two fractured people
supporting
each other.
Exactly. Right. And so it's like, hurt people will hurt people. Miserable people will be miserable with each other. They will drag each other further down the hole. So this is the disentangling, right? How do you get untangled from that? So the fractured difficulty occurs in the attachment and in the quality of the relationship with the parent that they originally had. And they are essentially incomplete and unable to internalize a regulatory stress response. And so they're always sitting in trauma. And trauma isn't just being on the battlefield. People often just think that's what it is. There are so many people in our country walking around with a trauma bond to their family members that then just spill out into the world all over the place. Workplaces, everyone, walking down the street, going to the post office, like they're having these moments where are you really seeing a person for who they are in a moment, or are you seeing what they are coming from and you're getting this other thing? Because when you sit down, you really ask someone, what's going on today when they're having moments? What's really going on underneath this? Because you're snarky or you're upset or all these things. Even in a person that's fractured, they are usually able to take a little of the veil down and say, well, I've had a bad day and this is why. And then you're dealing with some more reality and whatever, but it's still exhausting because you have to do the work to get there. to untangle it. And that doesn't mean it's going to stick with them. You're just going to have better understanding of it.
You have to get them to process.
Right.
Just
Exactly.
try to vocalize what's going on.
Right. And the external things that have happened to them break up the ability to have them integrate good, healthy things. And so a child who is developing emotional needs that are in the fracture mode, that doesn't go away. And then the parent, if they don't respond in childhood, it doesn't lead to psychological growth and maturity and any kind of repair of any fractures that are there. And I have students ask me all the time, can you repair fractures? Of course you can, right? Doesn't mean that you are, it's kind of like those vases, and one of my students a couple weeks ago likened it to this and had a great example. You know how you see the batiqued, ancient, beautiful vases that have the gold streaking through them because they've fallen and they put back together. Yep. That's a fractured, beautiful piece of artwork. It doesn't mean it's damaged. It means it's been put back together. Mm-hmm. And if people can get to a point where they can say, I have these fissures in my core, I have this beautiful piece of artwork that has all these things in it, but I've put them together and melded them together, and I don't have to have that. But to get a person in this kind of space to untangle from their own stuff, let alone having a person who's in the relationship with them untangle from it, it's very difficult, because they'll make excuses for it, both sides. Like, I'm damaged, I have problems, I'm not perfect. You'll hear that all the time. Well, I'm not perfect. No one asked you to be perfect. No one's perfect. But a quintessential person, like in addiction or in these places of like depression or anxiety, will say, and what they're really saying is, you have an expectation that's too high for me, and I'm going to put you down for having that so that I can feel better about myself.
Turning it around on you.
Right. Yep. It's like, nobody said you were perfect. No one said you had to be perfect, nor does anyone expect that. But they expect that that's what you expect.
It's the rare person who accepts the fact that they have control over their outcomes.
Right.
Because if you externalize it, if you victimize yourself, you don't have to take responsibility for your problems.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's a very tough thing for people to do, especially damaged people, fractured people.
Right. And
once they say it's my fault or I've done it, then they have to take responsibility for it, which is tough.
Exactly. Because then their common reaction to that is a stress response.
Yep.
Right. And their stress response then becomes widespread throughout all of their relationships. And it's sort of a refusal to self-regulate. It's a refusal to get out of distortion. It's a refusal on their part to get out of denial. It's, they are so poorly, securely attached. They lose how to be loving and empathic because they're too much about protecting themselves from their own stress, that they can't see how much stress they're creating in someone else. To your point, right? Yeah. So again, how do you untangle? You have to know. It's not a simple answer, and I've thought about this over and over about how to give a simple answer, and there's nothing. It's more about talking about just being able to recognize more and more so that you can set your own boundaries, which I'm going to get to.
Can it get back to we had an episode several episodes ago about and we've talked about this in the year review quite a bit about training people how to treat you.
Mm-hmm.
So can you effectively do that with an emotionally fractured person?
Yes.
Give them a better way to interact with you.
Yes. So the one thing I'm gonna say there is inner boundaries.
Yeah.
That's where it's gonna be.
Don't reward them.
So it's you have to set your own inner boundaries in the face of having this other person with you, in front of you, and they're not going anywhere. And if you set a poor boundary and the fractured person crosses you, it extends to bond you to see you as themselves. And if you don't set that boundary, you're interconnected. And if people are watching, they can see me put my hands together and put into like an enmeshment space.
Yep.
And so the boundary is so important. And people get really confused when I use the word boundary, because boundary does not mean setting up this thing that says you can't do. It's not about telling another person what they can and can't do. It's not about setting it at them about them can't do this, can't do that, can't date this person, can't do that. It's about I am uncomfortable when you bring this person around me because they disrespect you and they disrespect me. In order to keep my peace, I'm going to have my self-possession enough to say, I can't have that around me, and I need you to respect that. That's how you untangle. You're not participating in their stuff.
Yeah.
You're not getting dragged in. You're getting away from that. You're distancing yourself and psychologically disentangling yourself to find how yourself and how you want to be and how you think you want to be, and setting that inner boundary of like, I will not allow this, which goes back to that thing I said. Why are you doing this to me is not a good question. It's why am I allowing you to do this to me?
Your role in
my role in it,
yeah.
When I ask that is, I'm allowing it. What can I do to not allow this? I can set rules and boundaries for myself. I can set, if you do this, this is what I will do. If you do that, this is what I will do.
But you can't discuss that with them. You can't put it that way because they'll react harshly
right.
to that. You have to.
That's your
behavior.
That's your inner dialogue.
Yeah.
So it's more about acting on that. So you know that if X person does this, you know what your countermeasure is going to be to make sure you keep your boundary. You're not going to try to, you can't talk it through with someone in right. that level. You can talk things through about certain things, but you can't talk about, well, if you don't do what I want, then I'm going to do this. No, it's about, because that's again, controlling and because you have an expectation that they don't have.
Yep.
So take that off the table. It's really about, I know where I begin and where I end. So important. Such an important concept. I know where I begin and where I end.
Yep.
You probably don't, right? Not you, but
yeah.
You know, my listeners who are listening to this, if you know where you begin and end, you will know where someone else's end and beginning don't have, and that they might even not, you can see they're don't have a beginning, they don't have an end, they're a mishmash of hell, they're a mishmash of messed upness, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to swear this week because I know I'm broadcast into like important places, and we were laughing last week because I was broadcast out into a place, and shout out to the place that, apologies for using the F-bomb last week, but it was making a point.
It's fine. It's life.
I know. And
does this come down to rewarding behaviors you want and not rewarding behaviors you don't want? And that's emotionally.
I would say that like using the word reward isn't necessarily the word I would use here. It's more like, because you're setting your own personal boundaries for yourself, that you will not be maneuvered, you will not be manipulated, you will not be complicit and participate, that you will not lose your distinction of who you are in relationship to this person, that it's about natural consequences.
Yeah.
Not
punishment.
Not a punishment.
Yeah.
It's not reward. It's, you know, we're not going to praise, and people who are emotionally fractured thrive on praise, but also thrive on chaos. They're both equal.
Yeah.
So they love the praise, but at the same time can turn on a dime on you and be chaotic and just annihilate you if you don't have this sense of inner boundary of, I will not lose myself to this because I know where my beginning is and where my end is and where I will draw my line.
Yep.
And natural consequences come from drawing that line, right? And so as long as you remain conscious about that, great. If you do not remain conscious about that, you will be maneuvered.
Yeah.
And I'm very specific, as people know who have listened to me over the years, about manipulation versus maneuver. I don't like the word manipulation, even though colloquially I'll use it. But what it means is it's a coping strategy. People learn, fractured people, damaged people, sad people, unhappy people, they use manipulation, I use that loosely so that it's used, as a tactic because it's what they've learned as a coping strategy to get what they need from people. And then they hone it to where they can fine tune it to the level of fracture that they need.
Yep.
So some people are not so great at it and you can see through it. And then some people got it down solid. And that's the harder part, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to really stay 100 million steps ahead of them, which is the exhausting part. And so you have to be mindful of that you will never get hurt over and over if you are good at setting the boundary for yourself and not taking care of them, of not nurturing that. And they will either fall in line to some level or they will start pushing away from you, which is fine.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're no longer a supply chain for them. Right. And last week people were saying, well, what's the motive? Why do people do this? Because people always want to understand why, right? And the motive is because people who are fractured, really the dialogue in their head is, I can't do it by myself. I can't figure it out and I can't figure out the world. I need someone to take care of me. I'm scared. I'm inadequate. I lack empathy and I pull you in so that you can do it for me. And by the time that happens, you don't have the boundary up because you're being a nice person. So the motive is to essentially find people in their lives that will do that for them and they will take over for them. And they look for people that can handle their problems. They can handle their frustration. They can have tolerance for their difference of opinions because they make reasoning and excuses and justifications of, well, that person is this or that. And they damage the quality of the relationship that was set up at the beginning of the love bombing. And then if you're in that relationship and you're not a damaged, fractured person to that level, you'll end up feeling taken advantage of. If you start feeling taken advantage of, if you start having qualms in your head about like, wait a second, I am feeling resentful. There feels like an imbalance here. I have a narrative in my head that every time I give you a perspective of mine, it gets dashed or turned around or dismissed.
Because they need you to handle their problems without laying responsibility on them.
Right. It's transactional and one-sided. There's not
reciprocity. That becomes draining.
And there's no reciprocity. And the other person will hold out hope, like a hopeaholic, that someday there's a payout. Because just like in gambling, right, there is intermittent payout. And when it gets paid out, it's like the $5 million win. But that is once every so many million years. But then all the times in between are the, pulling the slot machine going, oh, another lose. And the more that happens and accumulates, the harder it is. And the more sad you get and the more exhausting it is because you have to take a break. And it's hard to because the fractured person is sitting there going, play me, play me, right? If we use that metaphor. So what you have to do to untangle from this is you have to stop reacting emotionally. You have to respond. And sometimes response is silence or detachment, which means I'm going to do my life. We may live together and all that, but if you're not on board with me, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to do my life, right? So stop reacting emotionally, no reaction. It's response out of logic and reason, right? And then what they want is not what they're going to get. And so you free yourself from them when you pull back and you be yourself and you be your boundary and you don't be reflection of what they want to see and what they want. And oftentimes, if you I've seen people try to have conversations with someone who does this, and they get frustrated having it because they're trying to explain something that the person just doesn't understand and will say, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Yep.
They're not dumb. They just can't get it integrated because it's too painful, because they'd have to let go of the thing that they know, the thing that they're wed to, the thing that's been protecting them. And it's
that I'm a victim.
That they are a victim and they are persecuted. And that your life, the way you are with them, especially if you've been in a long-term relationship, 20 years, 30 years, whatever, it's your fault.
Yeah.
if you understood me better, if you accepted me more, if you did more for me, if you, and 99.9% of the time, you've got people like literally who've bent over backwards, probably lost friends, lost life stuff, lost integrity,
sacrificed themselves
in lots of ways, work life, children, money, all kinds of things, because this person has literally maneuvered this person into their television program or their performance all the time, and they're keeping them up on stage to make them feel okay enough. And so it gets very muddled up in the fractured person and what they want, because they just want no boundaries. They don't want your boundaries. They want you to do what they want you to do. And so what ends up happening on top of that, so there's the quickest strategy is inner boundaries, detach to live your life, year of you, live your life. Now that means like you don't have to leave a marriage or relationship, but you have to be able to accept that you're going to live in this and adapt around it, and you're just not going to participate in it. Now, do people change? Sometimes people will change and adapt into you because they'd rather be with you because they're still looking for the plug into you, right?
And you can kind of teach them better ways to interact with you.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there's ways
make it more effective for them in a more positive way.
And there's, a series of things that you can say, and you've heard me say things like, that's noted when people say stuff, or when people are really hurtful, like a lot of fractured people will say really mean things. And, like, oh, you're going to wear that. Instead of being reactive to, I'm using that example, you're going to wear that. Or is that new? Instead of it being you reacting to their pull, what are they doing? They're not really saying, are you wearing that? They're implying something. Your response back to a fractured person is, did you mean to say that to me? Right? Or what is it that you're implying? Now, what you're going to get back almost every time is, oh, I wasn't implying anything. That's not what I meant. Da, 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 right? Because they didn't get where they wanted to go, which was your reaction. They do those things to get a reaction. And if you say,
don't reward it.
You don't reward it with the reaction that they're looking for. You reward it. You don't reward it. You give them the natural consequence of, even when you said that was kind of embarrassing. I am wearing this. And what is it that you're implying? Oh, I wasn't implying anything. And then you just don't say anything. It's very hard to do, especially when you're in that pattern, because your first response is to be defensive and react and like, what the hell's your problem? Why would you say that?
You have emotional needs too.
Right. Right. But if you set your inner boundary of, did you mean to say that? Do you know that you were really implying something else? Or what were you implying? Or when someone's insulting to you or someone's belittling you, and you take a long pause and just look at them with nothing, the uncomfortable spot, they may not get it in terms of what happened, but they get it enough to know that you're looking at them like, and you're going to be calm when you say it, like, is that what you meant to say? When you said that, was it your intent to embarrass me? Was it your intent to hurt me? Was it your intent to humiliate me? 99.9% of the time, even an emotionally fractured person is going to go, oh no, they backpedal. Because their ego now is on the line.
Or you're too sensitive.
Occasionally you'll get, well, you're being sensitive, and then they gaslight you. But more often than not, when you have the fractured person, because they're not expecting that response, they back it down with the backpedal, which you have to be careful of, not going, well, why would you do that? No, you don't want to go into why would you do that, because really, do you care? No, because at that point you're so much further into it. It's like, oh my God,
you know exactly what
they're doing. And to get into why did you do that? now you're back in the dance. They're not going to be able to tell you why, because that would embarrass them. That would put their ego on the line. Then they would look like the jerk that actually did say that, because you know exactly what they were implying.
Yep.
You know, it's kind of like if someone mutters something under their breath and you say, "What did you say?" "I didn't say anything."
Yeah.
And then your response to that is, "My experience is that I did hear you say something. I'm not sure what it was," if you don't know what it was, or "I did hear you say, you know, shut the F up," or whatever it was. And they'll say, "No, I didn't." You say, "My experience was that I heard that."
Yeah.
And then you let it go, because that will show them that you're hearing, you're seeing, you're not going to, but you're not going to go into, "Why would you say that? Don't you say that?" You know, because it's wasting your time.
Yep.
It's just wasting your time. And so, and that brings me to
gasoline on a fire.
It's a gasoline on the fire. So that leads to the last piece I wanted to talk about this is some people will call it like brain fogging you. Some people will call it mind effing you. Some people will say it's crazy making, or it's like scrambling your brain. Whatever you want to call it, you know what it feels like if you've been in it. And if a person doesn't want to understand you, and it doesn't matter to them what you're saying, because they aren't listening, you have to go to like this very specific strategy, because it's I call it the no approach strategy. And they have no interest in really hearing you. They have no interest in understanding you. They'll tell you they do, but they're not listening to you. They're not letting you finish your whole sentence. They're not letting it land to the last space and then having "Oh, I understand you," right? They're not putting the thoughts together. They're not doing that. They're trying to exhaust you and lead you into that brain mind F of insanity, of where you have self-doubt, and where you get like, this is where cultifying starts, right?
Yeah.
Like wait, did it not happen? Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm crazy. All these things. And that's a side effect of an EFP interaction, is that they will crazy make you.
Yeah.
And your reaction, and people who are empathic and who are deeply feeling, people who have the characteristics that these people don't, will very naturally jump into that and be brain scrambled. They'll be mind screwed, because they're so emotionally invested in, "But why don't you understand how much I love you, and don't you see?" And and I said this a few times back, the harder you love doesn't make them love you more. The harder you work at a job doesn't make them want you to give you a raise more. They just use you more to get they just use it more, right? And so the simple goal, right, in these cases is, you tell someone, "You can't treat me that way." And you say something that they don't want to hear. "You can't treat me that way." And the achievable outcome can happen, which is, they will not have happiness, but you will have inner self-worth. You will not be crazy made. And you're telling them very point blank, "This is what I will tolerate. I will not tolerate this. And if it isn't respected, I'm going to table this, and I'm going to walk away from the conversation, or I'm not going to be able to have you in the house with me, or I'm not going to be able to be in the house, or we're going to need to take a long break from each other." Like, you have the ability to set that tone of, "I will not tolerate." And that's where you start. "I will not tolerate that behavior, period." And then you'll go into a full explanation, because they'll ask you, "What does that mean?"
Yeah.
"No, I just won't tolerate it." And by that is, you don't then put restrictions on them. You just say, "I will not tolerate that, so I'm going to walk away."
Yeah.
I will not tolerate it again if it happens. And I need us to not be around each other. You have to either go for a drive, or I have to go for a drive, or we need to have separation for a while, because I will not tolerate that behavior. Inner boundary. You're not telling them they're a bad person. You're not telling them anything about themselves. You're just saying, "I need a break from you.
Yeah.
I need a break from this, and I will not tolerate poor treatment and unhappiness, because I'm going to tell you what I will live with and what I will tolerate." People don't do that. They are too accepting of the brain.
Well, they're fearful of the conflict too.
Well, they are, but they like it. They're fearful, but they like it.
I met the people trying to resist, trying to set the boundary.
Oh,
are often fearful of the
yes.
conflict that comes from it.
Right. And you have to be able to sit with the uncomfortability of the fact that they might be mad at you. And that's also a strategy that they use to manipulate you and maneuver you, is to get you to not say those things, to get you to not speak. They'll talk over you. They'll jump over you. They'll make it so that you don't feel like you have the voice, which is the mind game. It's the mind scramble. It's the mind F, because that's what they do. And you just have to know going in that, there's a no tolerance rule for this, no approach strategy. It's this, that, if you don't have interest in really hearing me, you have no interest in really understanding me, I'm not going to exhaust myself and lead myself into the scramble of brain crap you're about to put me through, because I know what's coming.
Don't reward behavior
and
you don't
you have
want.
to do all of that in your head, so that when you're there, all you're just going to look at them and say is, I'm not tolerating that. And or if someone's, like I was going to say, and someone's belittling you, it's very simple in these cases, hard but simple, to be able to look at them and say, if someone's like really, just belittling or snarky or giving you that shot, you just look right at them and you just say, that is beneath giving you a response to. Right? That's beneath me to give a response to that. So if someone tells you you're a terrible person and you're a piece of shit, and you are, you haven't done something right by them, and you, whatever that is, your answer is, if they're just hammering at you even once with some nasty comment, that's beneath a response from me to give to you. And that's it. And you stay nice and even and flat, because it's not worth it. And that's exhausting too, especially if you have to do it a lot. But these are strategies to start. And what it does is
especially
eventually,
if you're conflict averse.
Right. But you have to be able to sit with the uncomfortability, because if not, you're in the pattern of the other thing, which is conflict.
Got to choose
you have to choose your hard.
Choose your consequence.
Well, you have to choose your hard.
Yeah.
They're both hard. One is unnecessary hard. The one that you're doing that's perpetually crazy is unnecessary hard.
Yep.
The one that you choose that goes towards health and self-boundaries and self-setting around a fractured person is hard, but it has a better outcome.
Productive hard.
Right. It's a hard that ends better. I hate
unnecessary hard.
And people do unnecessary hard way more often than anything else, because it's what they know.
Yep.
It's because they were trained by their parents, and they were trained by their people, and they were reinforced by other people. And then they find all these people in their lives that I've talked about last week and this week to just keep going. And what does that do? It leads to addiction to the relationship. It leads to codependency. It leads to addiction to other things, sex, gambling, drugs, because people look for, if you don't give me the soothing, I'll find it somewhere else.
Yep.
And it's a very vicious cycle. So inner boundary setting, and not everyone's going to listen and understand you. And you have to figure out what you're going to do about that once you get through some of this initial, get out of the brain mind scramble and not be, crazy made, because that's a gaslight technique.
That's right.
So anyway.
And you're probably in that situation because you're susceptible to it.
Right. And there are many people susceptible to that, right? People that don't think that they would be, and then you just meet that person, and then all of a sudden it's game on, because you're that nurturer.
Yep.
Right? Empaths are notoriously having to put their guard up for that and know it, right? So
that you attract these people like flies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And remember, if you are asked by a psychopath to give them money and you do, you're in it.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Right? That's a whole nother show. So anyway, I'm going to close out this series, and we will start on something new, because we're at the end of that piece and talking about that, because I could talk forever about it, but it's time to move on to the next thing that's part of the year of you, as we're into March. So we had February was multiple weeks of, toxicity and getting rid of toxicity and people that are unhealthy in your life, and how to set boundaries and really understand how people are fractured and how to manage that so you don't get pulled in, so you can have your best life and move forward and really do your life. So now we're on to the next thing in the year of you in March of 2025, year of you. We're into March, and we're into third month of how to make sure you're doing you.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think it's going well.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Good audience today.
I know.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining me. And I will see you all on the fly next week. Same time, same place.